So as we normally do, we'll begin by chanting the refuges slowly, as is our tradition for these Buddhist studies courses. So I just pasted the link there in the chat for those who need it online. Buddhang saranang gacchami, dhammang saranang gacchami, sanghang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. And settle into our sitting posture as best we can. Relaxed, upright, relatively still. And even this simple process of finding an appropriate posture is a microcosm of how to be skillful in this sensual world. If we're looking to find the right posture as if it's going to make us happy, we're going to be endlessly fidgeting and adjusting because it will never be perfect. And on the other hand, if we just give up on the posture as if, well, it's never going to be perfect, so why even bother? Well, that doesn't work either. So being with the physicality of sitting is a perfect laboratory for learning a thing or two about how to be wisely present in this sensual world. because we've all learned in so many little and big ways how to create hell for ourselves and our central experiences. One of the great advantages of sitting for a period of time in a quiet room in a way that cultivates alertness, so we're not falling asleep so much, is that it really brings to the fore all of that restlessness of trying to get a nice experience, trying to have a nice experience. Because we're on purpose holding the body still and not looking around. Precisely because we're not acting out our desires, we can notice desire a little bit more easily. Like the impulse to plan is often the acting out of a desire. Or problem solving. And all the little tendencies to adjust the posture, looking for more comfort. So one of the things we notice when we're sitting for a period of time is we can more clearly see the torment of our addiction to sense experience. Because for this 30-minute period, we're renouncing so much doing, right? We're just sitting relatively still, and all the little and big reverberations of craving, of wanting and not wanting, just stand out. I might have mentioned that Gil Fronsdal calls these two tendencies of wanting and not wanting the caffeine of the soul. It's often the animating quality of the mind and the body. And sometimes the wanting and not wanting themselves, those patterns, are what the mind is identified with. Not so much what we want or what we don't want, but the wanting and the not wanting itself. The juiciness of that self-centered activity of wanting and not wanting. It's as if we feel a little naked without the mind wanting or not wanting. So this is another important part of our sitting practice, is we can take a new and fresh look at that space when wanting and not wanting quiets down or drops away for a while. And instead of interpreting that space that's empty of wanting and not wanting, instead of pathologizing it as something's missing or something's wrong, we can open to it in a fresh way and maybe appreciate the peacefulness, the contentedness, appreciate that it's empty of wanting and not wanting. It's like developing a taste for something that initially is unfamiliar, and then realizing, oh, this feels good. Maybe this is the way. But we have to let the wanting and the not wanting, those deep habits, fall away on their own through the non-identification, non-attachment to those patterns. We just let them come and go until they're a little quieter, not as intense, and maybe not there at all in moments. And that's such an interesting question for us during this set, just to be interested in the mind when it's temporarily free of the wanting and not wanting. Be really curious about the quality of that mind. Feel into that space that's empty of wanting and not wanting. And finally, before some quiet time, you might find it really useful to rely on the pleasantness of interest in the present moment as a way of supporting this investigation into the craving, the wanting mind, the not wanting mind. And remember not to try to control anything, but just noticing the ordinary and almost never ending arising of desire, the desire to swallow, the desire to think, to move. And we know the arising of the wanting mind, the arising of the not wanting mind, and also aware of the passing away or the cessation of each of those wants and those not wanting. So it's almost like we're a wise naturalist in the forest of our own experience, observing the wild mind, conditioned mind that's here. And without judgment, without any need to control, we just observe the mind in its natural setting, which is sensuality, and how it relates, how it reacts, what it does, what it doesn't do. The creature we're observing is quite sensitive, and it has these particular patterns of relating with craving, with wanting and not wanting. And we just want to see this honestly and clearly in this relatively simple environment. And when the naturalist, the observer, becomes restless or agitated, then put more emphasis in noticing how pleasant it is to be present, to be interested, to have some continuity of present moment awareness. There is a subtle pleasure in being present, and that helps in a way to soothe the observer. Brings in more patience, more capacity to be relaxed and alert. And remembering that it's in the nature of the conditioned mind to want and to not want. So we're not feeling obliged to fix or get rid of, simply observing all those subtle and not so subtle intentions to get something, to get rid of. all the little and not so little ways the mind is inclined to get more comfort in the sitting posture or get rid of discomfort in the sitting posture. And the same goes with the pleasantness of some thoughts and the unpleasantness of other thoughts. Wanting more of the pleasant ones, wanting to ditch the unpleasant thoughts or mental images. And again, it's really useful to recognize how this pervasive interest is a real counterweight to the mind getting pulled back into its identification with wanting and not wanting. That's not the same as observing when the mind is identified. It's almost like having a scientific or clinical way of observing the wanting and not wanting mind. And as we get closer to the end of the set, you might observe a desire to move the body or desire for the sit to be over, or the opposite, a desire for the sit to continue. And so much of what we need to learn, and one of the main purposes of cultivating this stable, continuous present moment awareness is to better understand the nature of desire. It's not about repressing desire, getting rid of it. It's about understanding what it is and what it isn't. Just through this fresh and patient observation. And it's always happening. It's always operating, desire. So the laboratory always comes with us, whatever the moment is, wherever we are. So for just the last couple minutes, just curious about this force of desiring, to really see it as a natural and impersonal force. Of course, there are desires, relatively wholesome desiring, relatively unwholesome desiring, probably the whole spectrum. So take a moment, adjust the body. Good to see everybody tonight. And I can see in this room, people in the in-person setting, that most of you, maybe almost all of you, got the message. So you can, of course, anybody can wear masks, and people just need to take care of themselves in any way. And we always have good masks here if you need one. And also, it's totally okay for people who are feeling, for whatever reason, like they need to be a little bit more protected, to work with me or the program host about getting somewhere in the room. Or you can always tune in, like so many folks are on Zoom. And Shelley and I, we want feedback too about these hybrid programs and how it's working, both the people who are coming in person. Do you feel left out because Mark's always looking at the camera? Or the people on Zoom feel like he never looks at us? So, and we're still learning, but we're likely, in one fashion or another, this hybrid world is probably going to stick around. So we want to do it in a way where we can actually be a community. And maybe one additional thing, if you're willing to help with technology, if you have some skill, please contact the office. I was just looking for Jessica online. It's like, where's Jessica? Jessica's often helping us with technology as a co-host. Yeah, our sensual world. And we'll have small groups at about 8:40. As I mentioned, I think in the first week, if you're on the Zoom, there's an expectation that you stay for the small groups. Of course, people in the room, we've locked the doors, you can't leave, because it's part of the Buddhist studies. But of course, you can always just tune in on live stream if you don't want to do those. We can't force people to be in the small groups. I can encourage you, because we learn a lot just being in those groups of 3 and checking in about what we're learning. And as I mentioned in the guided sit, there's a lot of learning when we just get interested in desire. What is this force of desire? And I think it's a useful way to think of desire as the animating force of life, because we have a way, including in Buddhism, of pathologizing desire. The problem isn't desire, because there's really no life without desire. The problem is the misunderstanding of desire, right? Or seeing desire with a self-view, taking it personally, taking the natural, unavoidable force of desire as if there's a me. And the basic wrong understanding is we think, because I'm me, I have desire. But one teacher turned it around, and I think this is a really helpful way to understand our mind. It's because desire, like I said, it is this animating force of life. It's like we say in Western science, it's the force behind evolution, desire. And so, one way, I think a really useful way to think of it, there's this impersonal force of desire that animates life. And at some point, there was that impersonal force, just like different species, plants, animals, there's a mutation and then all of a sudden, the members of that species that have that mutation, they're just so much better able to survive and thrive that after a short period of time, they take over. There's no members of that species that don't have that mutation, because there's half or whatever the population that is so much better selected to survive. So when you think of it in this way, you can imagine this innovation in the evolutionary process of desiring and desiring and desiring. And all of a sudden there's desiring with this added piece of part of that mind of that creature takes the desiring personally. And it's like desiring on steroids, because now there's a sense of a somebody, a fixed somebody that's doing the desiring. You see how it amplifies the force of desiring, because all very simple creatures desire. We all did this probably in 3rd grade. We grow green beans and you notice how the plant goes to the sun, and the way we language that, the plant desires the sunlight, gravitates towards the sunlight. Well, that's desire. But if somehow the green bean thought like that there's a me that wants that sunshine, or a me that doesn't want to die, we don't sense that in a creature or a plant like a green bean, but we don't really know, right? But we do know ourselves, or we can at least. And we really feel that way. Like, if I don't put a sweater on, this chill is going to kill me. If I don't scratch that itch, I'm going to go bonkers. If this sit doesn't end soon, I'm just going to bolt. I was reading something by a Western Buddhist monk. He was talking about desire, and he gave an example of being stuck in a traffic jam and having bad diarrhea, and just the intense desire, and how everything else leaves the mind. This has to happen, and not having any control. And that's like where we really see the identification with desire really causes a lot of pain. Desire is not the problem. And that's what I mentioned in the guided sit tonight. Maybe some of you caught this, but it's almost like the mind is more identified with or attached to the doing of the desiring, the wanting, and the not wanting. Right? So desire doesn't just mean to want something. We desire to get rid of something. So craving, tanha is the Pali word. Craving means both wanting and not wanting. That's, about sense experience. That's one type of craving. Craving to become somebody and craving to be done with it. Those are the three types of craving. We can observe this next week. And a nice simple definition that we get from Ajahn Sumedho for craving is it's desire with attachment. Or we could say desiring with misunderstanding. Where we, and misunderstanding, misperceiving is nicely defined by the Buddha as these 4 ways we distort. So when we misperceive desire, that means we see something that's permanent. We see it as permanent when actually the desiring comes and goes. This is what's so amazing when you practice with desire, is you see that it ends without having to gratify it. And that is so stunning, because it looks like when we have a lot of desire, the way we tend to perceive it is, this desire is permanent until I get what I want. It's like an edifice. You will not be okay until you get what you want. This longing, this ache of longing is a fixture. That's how it seems when we have craving. So it seems permanent. It seems personal. It seems like it will be that the satisfaction will be real when we get what we want or get rid of what we don't want. And that it's somehow, the thing we desire is somehow intrinsically good or beautiful or right. But all of that is constructed, right? Because things aren't actually permanent. Desire ends because there's always going to be the next desire, right? It's like there'd be an incredible traffic jam of desiring if it never ended. But it's like we're on to the next and to the next. It's really like an addiction. But the key point that I want to make here is that the addiction is more to the activity of desiring. Like what we take personally is more the activity of desiring than getting what we think we want or getting rid of what we don't want. And that's often what we talk about when we're hanging out with our friends or loved ones. We talk together about what we want and what we don't want. Oh, I can't wait until this, week is over. Can't wait until I'm getting a new cell phone tomorrow. Can't wait. I got the protective case today. It's so nice. I don't know, some amazing marketing ploy. They figured out that people like us, myself at least, are spellbound by nice packaging. I don't know if people have bought Apple products before, but tomorrow I'm going to get the new SE phone. And because mine doesn't have much battery life anymore. But I got the case from Apple, which was, of course, way overpriced. I'm guessing. It seems that way to me for what it is. And but the packaging was so nice. It almost feels worth it. Just that, like, that's that study in gratification. Like, I must be special because somebody designed this packaging so nice and it came to me. And we always miss how ephemeral, how the promise isn't kept, that it's going to be really matter, because we hop onto the next desire. Yeah, tomorrow I'll get the cell phone, and there will be a little bit of pleasure, just the elegance of a machine that works pretty well, can do things, and the battery will last longer than an hour and things like that. I still love you, phone. As long as you're recording, you just get through tonight. But it's just interesting how we just jump to the next thing we want or don't want, because that's the addictive piece. We feel real and alive when we're desiring, when we're attached to wanting and not wanting. And it's very interesting, and I just encourage all of us to make a study this week, and this is one of the reasons we sit, but to make a study of boredom. And just to sort of find different times during the day where you can hang out and really embrace a non-doing, a non-reacting, a non-getting, a non-fixing, a non-becoming. It's like it is actually in some ways like a psychological death. And the reason that that's so potent, just like in our formal sitting practice where we hold still mostly, it's such an affront to be awake. I mean, it's easy when we're, reading a book or watching a movie or sleeping, but it's such an affront to, on some, like, be vulnerable to the interpretation. I'm not doing anything. I'm not becoming anybody. I'm not getting anywhere. Oh my God, I'm wasting my life. I mean, it's amazing. We're totally fine looking at catalogs or endlessly scrolling online, but to sit there in a relaxed and alert way and observe the mind, which is so relevant to our experience as a human being. And we can have this profound, scary sense of boredom and like we're missing our life. So for the conversation tonight in the small groups, I'll just give you some themes before I continue talking. But just to, last week I talked about the Buddhist teachings where he said, when people were curious about, like, what did you do to become a wise human being? And he one of the things he said is, in terms of studying the experience of gratification of sense experience, I've done it to the extent as much as any human can do. Maybe people match my clear analysis, discernment of the experience of gratification, but I've done it to the nth degree. You can't study it more than I've studied it. I've studied the drawbacks of sensuality to the nth degree. And I've studied the escape, like how to be a human being with a body and a mind here and now, but not pushed around by those 8 worldly winds of gain and loss and pain and pleasure and success and failure and praise and blame. Just the duality of our sense world. How to be free of being pushed around in sensuality. Because the escape we imagine is that third kind of craving. Get me out of here. When we do it, because inevitably, regularly, we get burned by sensuality. We feel betrayed or whatever. And sometimes we just hop onto the next, thing we want, and that gets us through, okay. But when I get home, popcorn, or when, tomorrow I get breakfast. I mean, how many, this is something just to observe, like during our sit tonight, but all week long, every carrot you dangle in front of your mind, the little promise, you behave, Mark, and you get to go to sleep tonight. Or you know, if you're good, you're going to be able to retire someday. And then you won't have to do anything. Which is probably the most scary thing, right? It always looks good. I mean, it's like, that's the thing about desire. We're just ignorant about the things we're promising ourselves. You'd think we'd learn. I drove to bakery to get chocolate. I have to be honest, more than one chocolate chip cookie today. And, but it was just that, and the thought did occur to me that we're talking about sensuality and craving tonight. So I thought, well, this would be good field work. But it's like all the way, like whenever there was a more balanced presence for moments, in that whole ordeal, there was very, it was pretty clear that it wouldn't really matter. I mean, it wasn't like the mind really thought it would matter, but the force of habit, like the animating force of being able to go do something, it's like that's what we know. And we really, I find in myself, there's that, I think it's Ajahn Thanisaro says, we haven't really stared that monster in the face of the mind not being formed around craving. And because it has a flavor of death because it's so unfamiliar, not because you actually die when we drop the identification with desiring, but it's very unfamiliar. And this is sort of, because a lot of what the Buddha taught was familiar stuff at the time, about generosity and moral integrity, around non-harming, and even concentration and just collecting, unifying the mind in the present moment. But the unique piece that the Buddha added was really looking at the joy, like staring that monster in the face, whether you call it in a moment boredom or like that sense of lack, like when the mind isn't identified with wanting or not wanting, there can initially be this not so pleasant sense of emptiness, like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what life is about when I'm not wanting or not wanting. And we have to learn how to be with that yucky feeling, really relax with it. Because we might discover, as the Buddha did, and so many of us have at least tasted to some degree, that there's this whole, let's call it other realm or dimension of pleasure. There's the pleasure of getting what we want and getting rid of what we don't want. That's a real pleasure. It's just somewhat or very ephemeral. But there's this whole other dimension of pleasure, which is basically the pleasure of not being caught up in this realm of sensuality, of thinking that this endless pursuit of what we want and don't want leads somewhere. It's such a relief for the mind to get out of that vortex. And the first place we discover it is when the mind just gets a little concentrated and we're just with the breath, or we're just absorbed in some work, we're doing needlepoint or whatever it might be, it doesn't really matter. So in the flow of being with the breath, being with the knitting, being with the washing of the dishes, being with whatever, that there's an escape from the normal torments of the craving mind. And if there's an invitation, like we get some teaching, encouragement to notice that pleasure of seclusion, the mind secluded to some degree from the craving, from the identification with desire. Because like where this happens, there will be probably desire, like when you're doing mindfulness of breathing, there's a desire to track the breathing in and the breathing out. And there should be a desire to notice the pleasantness of that, the pleasantness of that seclusion. I mean, there's all kinds of desires, even for meditation, but if we're doing our practice skillfully, we don't bother to identify with the desire because it's an unneeded stress and it's counterproductive. It isn't onward leading. And we learn this, all of us, we learn this the hard way, don't we? We do get attached to wanting the meditation to progress, the concentration to deepen, to get more calm, more joy, more ease, more stillness. But, you know, we learn over and over again that doesn't develop the meditation, that develops agitation and judgment and doubt and frustration. So eventually, some of us, it takes a long time, others catch on sooner. But if we stick with it, we'll learn that concentration deepens when we follow the instructions without identification or attachment. We just do what we're told. I mean, I don't know if this will make sense, but when I practiced in Burma for a while, and this is told by many people who practice in the monasteries in Burma, the most impressive meditators are these young women, like older teenagers. And one of the reasons, it's a pretty patriarchal culture. And and the monks in Burma, probably still to today, but certainly when I was there and before, they're sort of the top of the heap in terms of power and prestige, you know, more than a businessman or a political leader. It's like if you're a Sayadaw teacher and head of a monastery, it's like you're the high status person in the culture. And so when that person tells you to do something and you're a relatively low status person like a woman in this culture, you just do what you're told. And they get success in their practice because they follow the instructions and the practice unfolds. And this is the thing, it's like we just stay with the present moment in that way. We'll start to, and if we get invited, if we're reminded to notice how good that is, notice the goodness, the rightness of the mind that is vividly present, so present that it's not bothering to get identified with desire. Because what's being emphasized is the presence. Oh, this is being known. And this begins to open our mind to a whole other realm of pleasure. And this is important in the second half of the course. You know, we'll talk about contentment and dispassion, which is just the maturing of that pleasure. Initially, it can be even quite rapturous, lots of joy, lightness, brightness, energy, feeling really enlivened and calm at the same time. But it's really important to, as I mentioned in the guided sit, to be somewhat attuned to that pleasure so that we can be that non-attached observer, observing desire, because we're in a good place, we feel good. So it's like we don't have to go looking for desire, we can cultivate the pleasure of seclusion, of the continuity of present moment awareness, desire will keep showing its cards because that force of nature is totally, it's just part of the mind stream. It's not going anywhere. It's always going to be active. But then we'll be able to, because of that contentedness of being relatively settled and whole and unified, we can see desire in a new way. And that's really the insight. I mean, one way to think about the insight. The cessation of craving isn't the cessation of desire. It's the cessation of misunderstanding desire. And when we understand desire for what it is, it's not a problem. But that's easier said than done. And the interesting thing, and I'm sure that this is familiar to some of you, there will be moments when desire is a problem, and then in the next moment, it's not a problem. Like there's some real space of wisdom, and the mind feels like in safe territory, like, oh, I don't need to worry about this desiring because I get it. But then in the next moment, I mean, like literally the next moment, we find ourselves acting out that desire or that aversion in a way that's unskillful, even though there was some true clarity in the previous moment. Because that clarity and the liberation from doing stupid stuff is moment by moment by moment. And we can lose it, just like we can get that clarity. I do this a lot with my own addictive tendencies. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm not going to do that. I see it, I feel it. I know where it leads. It's not helpful. I'm okay with the tug, it's not even so much a tug. And then I kind of, so I do that discernment, there's presence, mindful presence, it's balance, wisdom's good. And then I lose the thread of the present moment, and whatever that desire and the tendency to identify with the desire kind of finds another little way back into the mind. The mind gets attached. And before mindfulness kicks back in, we're already down the road acting out that desire or that aversion. And that's why there's such an emphasis on the continuity of present moment awareness. And it isn't personal, it feels personal. It feels like there's a war going on between, the forces of attachment and craving and wisdom. But this, the tendency to misunderstand desire is it just has momentum. It's not an evil force, but it is not to be taken lightly, because we'll do all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, think about how many lives have been destroyed by sexual attraction or by using drugs or overeating or whatever people do because they've gotten addicted. And it's really interesting, like this doesn't matter. But the thing is, it doesn't, that one time doesn't matter. But one time leads to the next time. You know how it is. So the best place to really understand that desire is just what it is, and it isn't more than what it is before it gains a lot of momentum and that groove is well greased. So in your groups tonight, you can discuss your own relationship with desire, and you can choose a particular place where you've seen in moments the emptiness of that particular desire that shows up for you. And then in other moments it feels so much real, and there really is a me that needs to do this. I'm helpless in the face of this. I can't help myself. I know I'm going to do this. I know I shouldn't, but I'm going to do this anyway. I'm going to call this person. Or we just can't leave it alone. And that's just so interesting to see, because it's very real, but it can be understood as being very impersonal. But so many things are impersonal, but we really have to pay attention. Like if you do backpacking or any kind of wilderness adventure stuff, the forces of nature are totally impersonal. They're not out to get you, but you have to totally respect the forces of nature. Even though they're not evil, they're not out to get you. And it's exactly the same in terms of our own mental conditioning around desire. Another thing to talk about is this place that I mentioned around fear of boredom, and how we often, like when almost like an antidepressant, will look for something to want to give life purpose. Oh, I could do this. I'll get interested in that. And then when things run their course and we kind of are starting to creep back into the territory of boredom, my life losing meaning, because the thing I really wanted, I've either gotten enough of it and it didn't really satisfy in any meaningful way, because I'm now vulnerable again. And we can even, this wise presence can even catch that sort of like, this is Mark desperately looking for the next thing to animate, give meaning to my life. And in the Buddhist realms of existence, they have this realm of the hungry ghosts, right? It's a sort of, I'm guessing, but who knows, metaphorical system that just describes different aspects of our mind, and that they're depicted as having huge bellies, huge appetites, but their mouth is the size of a pinhole, so they can never satisfy their appetite. And it's a pretty graphic depiction of that needing something. And a lot of us, when we first come into the Buddhist teachings and practices, it is for us that next thing. Oh, I'll do this. I'll desire this. I'll become this. This will save me. And hopefully it will, but not because we become Buddhists, but because through the practice, this is the thing, if we just do what we're told, it will radically change the mind's relationship to sensuality. And before we break into small groups, I'll just mention, because it's so relevant, and at least I'm not sure if it's literally true, but in the early Buddhist tradition, it's considered the first talk that the Buddha gave, this setting the wheel of Dhamma, setting the wheel of these wise teachings, these liberating teachings in motion. And the first part of that, the story is at least that the Buddha found some of the friends that he had earlier practiced with, but they had abandoned him because he had given up on the ascetic practices, because he realized that denying the body its comforts doesn't lead to liberation. And they thought he was getting weak, so they left. Soon after that, Buddha got healthier, came into a more balanced place, and had his deep awakening under the Bodhi tree. And then a few months later, he tracked down these 5 friends, Dharma friends, practitioners, and they were pretty good meditators already. And the first thing he said to them is, as we already knew, this is a real rough paraphrase, that happiness, true release, true freedom doesn't come through indulging in sense experience. And then they, of course, nodded, because they were heavy-duty ascetics, into ascetic practices, a lot of self-denial, fasting, and things like that. And then he goes, but, ignoring the needs of the body, the way he said it is, that which is devoted to sensual pleasures and sensual objects is ignoble, unprofitable, but also that which is devoted to self-affliction, painful, unprofitable, that's also not the way. Avoiding both of these extremes, the middle way realized by me, the Tathagata, that's how the Buddha referred to himself after his awakening, the one thus gone, that's what that means, Tathagata. Producing vision, producing knowledge leads to calm, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, to unbinding. So by not rejecting sensuality, which is its own, that's the craving non-existence. That's its own kind of reaction, self-centered reaction to sensuality. It's more of the same. Thinking that sensuality is going to save us is one approach. Thinking that sensuality is out to get me, I'm just going to give up on it, that's another wrong approach. And wanting to become somebody in a better sensual situation is the same thing. These are the three expressions. So it's abandoning craving. And that's something you can reflect on in the small group, but also especially this coming week. Who am I without craving? Or what am I? Or what is this when craving ceases? Because, you know, we have some intuition about this already, because craving isn't constant. Some moments during the day, it's like really big and intense. And other moments, it's quite diminished, right? So we can learn a lot just getting a sense, how's craving now? Where's the craving? How's craving operating in the mind and the body, heart now? What's it feel like? Is it true that craving ceases without gratification? Let me just notice. Like, after the small groups, you go home and maybe you promised yourself, you dangled the carrot. And it would be nice just you get home, you sit down, you go, okay, there's that reverberation of me promising myself. You get to watch your favorite show or whatever you did. You get to put your best pajamas on and crawl into bed. But just to sort of, in a playful way, just like not indulge in the gratification and just notice what you learn. This is really what we want to do with this 4-week course, is just get to know the mind and sensuality, craving, the possibility of the pleasure of contentment and dispassion, to really see that not as a resignation, and we'll talk more about that the next 2 weeks, the real freedom and satisfying pleasure of letting go of attachment